In 1946, a French anthropologist named Marcel Griol sat across from a Dogon elder in the cliffs of Mali. The old man began drawing symbols in the sand, circles within circles, orbital patterns. And then he said something that would haunt Western science for decades. The star has a companion. It is heavy. It takes 50 years to complete its dance. He was describing Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, a star that wouldn't be photographed by Western astronomers until 1970. How did he know? That's not the only question. In 1897, British soldiers broke into the Kingdom of Benin and found something that terrified them. Bronze sculptures so intricate, so technically advanced, that European newspapers refused to believe Africans made them. The German anthropologist Felix von Luschen examined them and said, "These castings are technically superior to anything achieved in Europe until the Renaissance." But that wasn't supposed to be possible. Not according to the story we'd been told. Deep beneath the Sahara Desert, satellite imaging has revealed something extraordinary. The outlines of ancient cities, vast networks of civilization buried under sand, cities that predate many of the so-called cradles of civilization we learned about in school. They're still there, waiting. Here's what nobody tells you. Africa's genius wasn't lost to time. It wasn't eroded by the elements or forgotten by its people. It was systematically hidden, deliberately erased, methodically buried under layers of propaganda so thick, so pervasive, that even today most of the world has no idea what was stolen from human history. Throughout history, Africa's greatest genius wasn't lost, it was hidden. And the question that should keep you awake at night is simple. Who hid it, and why? Before we go any further, understand something. What you're about to hear won't be taught in most classrooms. It won't appear in most history books, because some truths are too dangerous to the narratives that built empires. If you want to be part of uncovering what they tried to erase, subscribe to Ancient Africa Untold, because some stories won't be told anywhere else. To understand the cover-up, we must begin with something found deep underground, something older than the pyramids, something that, according to everything we thought we knew about human development, shouldn't exist. But it does. Let me introduce you to the antagonist of this story. It's not a person. It's not even a single institution. It's something far more insidious. I call it the silence machine. The silence machine is a global system of erasure that has operated for centuries, built on pillars of political rewriting, religious suppression, colonial narrative manipulation, and academic gatekeeping. It's the reason your history textbook had 30 pages on ancient Rome and half a paragraph on African civilizations. It's the reason museums across Europe are filled with African artifacts, while African museums remain empty. Listen to what they said. In 1830, the German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel wrote, "Africa is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit." He called it the land of childhood, lying beyond the day of self-conscious history. David Hume, the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, declared, "I am apt to suspect the Negroes to be naturally inferior to the whites. There scarcely ever was a civilized nation of that complexion." These weren't fringe opinions. These were the intellectual foundations of Western academia. Christian missionaries arriving in Africa wrote in their journals that Africans had no history worth recording. Colonial administrators drew maps with vast blank spaces labeled simply unknown or unexplored, even though millions of people lived there with kingdoms, trade routes, and complex societies. The erasure was systematic. When Europeans encountered advanced African civilizations, they had three options: deny African agency, attribute it to outside influence, or simply destroy the evidence. They did all three. But here's the problem with lies. Reality doesn't cooperate. Archaeological evidence kept emerging, artifacts kept being discovered, scientific analysis kept contradicting the narrative. Every decade, something new surfaced that shouldn't exist according to the story the silence machine had crafted. Carbon dating didn't lie. Metallurgical analysis didn't lie. Astronomical alignments didn't lie. And so the question becomes unavoidable. If Africa had no genius, no civilization, no scientific advancement as they claimed, then why do we keep finding evidence of advanced science, engineering, and mathematics in places where they said there was nothing but primitive tribes? Why were they so desperate to convince the world that Africa contributed nothing to human progress? The first clue to answering that question was discovered by accident in the forests of what is now Nigeria. And when scientists finally analyzed what they found, it didn't just challenge the narrative, it shattered it completely. The year is 1928. A mining operation in central Nigeria uncovers something strange. Terracotta heads, hundreds of them, buried in the earth, perfectly preserved. But it's not the artistry that stuns archaeologists. It's what else they find nearby. Iron, sophisticated ironwork, tools, weapons, evidence of smelting operations. Carbon dating reveals something that shouldn't be possible. This iron was forged around 450 BCE. That's nearly 2,000 years before Europeans claimed Africans learned metallurgy from Arab traders. Welcome to the Nok civilization. The Nok people weren't just working with iron, they had mastered it. Archaeological excavations revealed furnaces capable of reaching temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to produce steel-quality iron in 450 BCE. To put that in perspective, Europe wouldn't develop comparable blast furnace technology until the 14th century CE. That's a 1,800-year gap, but it gets more interesting. In 2009, metallurgical analysis of Nok iron tools revealed something extraordinary. The carbon content, the microstructure, the forging techniques. They indicated an understanding of metallurgy that European scholars had assumed impossible for primitive societies. Some tools showed evidence of carburization, a sophisticated process that increases hardness by introducing carbon into the iron structure. This wasn't accidental, this was engineered, and the Nok weren't alone. Across sub-Saharan Africa, evidence of advanced ironworking predates European metallurgy by centuries. In Tanzania, archaeologists discovered iron smelting sites dating to 1500 BCE. In Rwanda, ancient furnaces produced steel using a natural draft system, so efficient that European engineers in the 19th century couldn't understand how it worked without modern bellows. The archaeological record is unambiguous. African metallurgy wasn't behind Europe. In many regions, it was centuries ahead. But here's where the silence machine kicked into overdrive. When European scholars first encountered evidence of African ironworking, they faced a cognitive crisis. Their entire worldview was built on the assumption of African inferiority, so they created alternative explanations. They claimed Arab traders must have taught Africans, or that Phoenicians traveled inland, or that the dating must be wrong. Anything except the obvious truth. Even when the evidence became undeniable, Western textbooks downplayed or ignored it entirely. African metallurgy was relegated to footnotes, if mentioned at all. The narrative of European technological superiority had to be preserved at all costs. But the Nok left something else behind, something that would prove even harder to explain away. Their terracotta sculptures show anatomical precision and artistic sophistication that rivals anything produced in the ancient Mediterranean. Some heads are life-sized, with detailed facial features, elaborate hairstyles, and expressive realism. Scientific analysis revealed the clay was processed using techniques that wouldn't be discovered in Europe. for over 1,000 years. One sculpture showed something peculiar, a figure wearing what appears to be a complex beaded headdress with geometric patterns. When archaeologists analyzed the symmetry, they found mathematical ratios consistent with advanced understanding of proportion and design. This raises an uncomfortable question. How did an ancient African culture achieve industrial-level temperatures, sophisticated metallurgical processes, and mathematical precision in art without any of the prerequisites that European historians claimed were necessary for civilization? The answer is simple, though it contradicts everything the silence machine taught us. They figured it out themselves. Because African genius was never primitive. It was simply erased from the story. But metallurgy and art are just the beginning. What we found next wasn't forged in fire. It was carved into stone with mathematical precision that defies conventional explanations. Imagine standing before a wall that stretches 30 feet high, no mortar holding the stones together, no cement, no binding agent of any kind, just granite blocks, some weighing over 1,000 pounds, fitted so precisely that you can't slide a razor blade between them. Now imagine this wall has stood for over 700 years, through storms, through earthquakes, through centuries of weathering. This is Great Zimbabwe. When European explorers first encountered Great Zimbabwe in the late 19th century, they were confronted with an architectural impossibility. A stone city covering nearly 1,800 acres, walls 30 feet high and 20 feet thick, conical towers, sophisticated drainage systems, evidence of international trade, gold, imported ceramics from China and Persia, glass beads from India, and not a single European had built it. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. In 1871, German geologist Karl Mach visited the ruins. His conclusion? Africans couldn't have built this. It must have been the work of ancient Phoenicians, or perhaps the Queen of Sheba. When pressed for evidence, he had none. Just the unshakable belief that Africans were incapable of such engineering. The British archaeologist James Theodore Bent visited in 1891. Same conclusion. He wrote extensive reports attributing the construction to anyone except the people who actually lived there, the Shona people of Zimbabwe. This wasn't scholarship. This was denial in service of an ideology. The silence machine was working overtime. European textbooks taught generations of students that Great Zimbabwe was built by outsiders. Museum placards echoed the lie. Colonial administrators in Rhodesia, modern Zimbabwe, actively suppressed archaeological evidence that contradicted the narrative. But here's the problem. The evidence didn't care about ideology. Radiocarbon dating placed the construction between the 11th and 15th centuries. Pottery analysis matched local Shona styles. The architectural techniques were consistent with other Shona structures throughout the region. Oral histories of the Shona people described Great Zimbabwe as the heart of a vast trading empire. And perhaps most damningly, when European engineers finally analyzed the construction techniques, they discovered something extraordinary. The dry stone masonry used at Great Zimbabwe demonstrated an understanding of load distribution, architectural balance, and precision engineering that was breathtakingly advanced. The walls weren't just stable, they were optimized. The curve of the great enclosure isn't decorative, it's structural engineering. The chevron pattern on the walls isn't just artistic, it distributes weight and allows for thermal expansion. Whoever built this understood physics. The site reveals something else. Great Zimbabwe was the center of a sophisticated economic system. Archaeological evidence shows the inhabitants traded gold, ivory, and iron across the Indian Ocean network. They had diplomatic and commercial relationships with Swahili city-states, Arab merchants, Indian traders, and Chinese exporters. This wasn't a primitive village. This was an economic powerhouse. At its height, Great Zimbabwe was home to an estimated 18,000 people. It had social stratification, specialized labor, agricultural systems capable of feeding thousands, and artistic traditions producing some of the finest soapstone carvings in pre-colonial Africa. So why were Europeans so desperate to deny African engineering? Because acknowledging Great Zimbabwe meant acknowledging something far more dangerous: that African civilizations had developed complex societies, advanced technologies, and international trade networks completely independent of European influence. That admission would destroy the ideological foundation of colonialism. If Africans built empires, if they traded internationally, if they created architectural marvels, then what justification remained for subjugation? The silence machine couldn't allow that question to be asked. But architectural genius wasn't Africa's greatest secret. The bigger shock, the discovery that truly terrified Western scholars, was found not in stone but in the stars. Let's return to that moment in 1946. Marcel Griol and the Dogon Elder in Mali. The Elder described Sirius B, the invisible companion star, with disturbing accuracy. He said it was incredibly dense, made of matter heavier than anything on Earth. He said it orbited Sirius A every 50 years. He was right. Sirius B is a white dwarf star. Its density is so extreme that a single teaspoon of its matter weighs over 5 tons. It completes an orbital cycle around Sirius A in approximately 50.1 years. The first photograph of Sirius B was taken in 1970. Modern physics confirmed its extraordinary density decades after that. So how did the Dogon know? Before we descend into alien theories or mystical hand-waving, let's consider what the evidence actually suggests. Ancient African astronomy was far more sophisticated than Western history acknowledges. The Dogon weren't alone in their cosmic knowledge. In ancient Kemet, what we call Egypt, priest scientists mapped the heavens with precision that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the Renaissance. They developed a 365-day calendar by observing the heliacal rising of Sirius. They aligned the Great Pyramid to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a single degree. That's 0.5 degrees of error. Modern engineers with laser theodolites struggle to match that precision. But Kemet's astronomical achievements have been studied, if sometimes reluctantly acknowledged. What the silence machine really tried to bury was the evidence of advanced astronomy throughout sub-Saharan Africa. In the Sahara Desert, at a site called Nabta Playa, archaeologists discovered a stone circle dating to approximately 5000 BCE. That's 7,000 years ago. Analysis revealed it wasn't just a random arrangement of rocks. It was an astronomical observatory. The stones align with the summer solstice. 3 of the stones create a line pointing to the belt of Orion. Another alignment tracks the heliacal rising of Sirius. The site includes what may be the world's oldest known archaeoastronomical device, predating Stonehenge by over 1,000 years. The people who built Nabta Playa understood celestial mechanics, seasonal cycles, and the importance of astronomical observation for agricultural planning and religious calendars. This was in Africa, in 5000 BCE. But let's get back to the Dogon and their impossible knowledge. Some scholars try to explain it away by claiming French missionaries must have taught them about Sirius B. There's one problem with that theory. The Dogon cosmology was documented in tribal oral traditions that predated European contact. Their creation myths, their religious ceremonies, their cultural identity was built around this astronomical knowledge. Other scholars suggested the Dogon observed Sirius B through natural atmospheric conditions that briefly made it visible. That's theoretically possible, but extremely unlikely given its magnitude and the specific knowledge they possessed about its composition and orbit. The simplest explanation, the one the silence machine resists, is that ancient African cultures developed sophisticated astronomical observation techniques, possibly passed down through millennia of oral tradition, that allowed them to detect and track celestial phenomena invisible to the naked eye. Is that so impossible? Consider this. African cultures had strong traditions of multi-generational astronomical observation. They tracked celestial patterns not for abstract scientific curiosity, but for practical reasons: agriculture, navigation, religious calendars. They had the motivation, the intelligence, and the time. What they supposedly lacked, according to Western scholars, was the capability. But that assumption keeps being proven wrong. Across Africa, archaeological and anthropological research reveals astronomical knowledge embedded in ancient structures, oral traditions, and cultural practices. The Borana people of Kenya developed a calendar system based on lunar stellar observations that's accurate to within hours over a 7-year cycle. The ancient Kushites, Nubians, built pillar observatories that tracked solar and stellar movements. Even in West Africa, kingdoms like the Songhai Empire had court astronomers who advised on agricultural planning and religious ceremonies based on celestial observations. The pattern is undeniable. African astronomical science was real, sophisticated, and widespread. But the silence machine couldn't allow that narrative. Acknowledging African astronomy meant acknowledging African scientific thought. And that opened the door to a terrifying possibility: that Africa had contributed fundamentally to human scientific development in ways that had been systematically erased. So they did what they always did. They minimized it, ignored it, attributed it to outside influence, anything to avoid the obvious conclusion. But Africa's genius wasn't confined to the heavens. Some of the most shocking discoveries were made right here on Earth, in the fields of medicine and biology, where African doctors were performing the impossible centuries before modern science. In ancient Kemet, around 1600 BCE, a physician documented 48 surgical case studies in what we now call the Edwin Smith Papyrus. He described brain trauma, spinal injuries, fractures, and dislocations, with detailed observations on symptoms, diagnosis, and treatment. Case number 6 describes a compound skull fracture. The physician notes the patient's inability to speak, convulsions and discharge from the ears and nose. He documents the examination process, palpating the injury, observing gait disturbances, testing reflexes. His diagnosis: an ailment not to be treated. But here's what's extraordinary. The document shows an understanding of brain function, neurological symptoms, and diagnostic methodology that wouldn't reappear in Western medicine for over 3,000 years. The papyrus reveals something else. Ancient African physicians understood the brain controlled the body. They knew spinal injuries could cause paralysis. They documented the pulse and its connection to the heart. This wasn't folk medicine. This was clinical observation and empirical medical science. But the Edwin Smith Papyrus is just one example. Archaeological evidence reveals African medical sophistication across the continent. In ancient Nubia, modern Sudan, analysis of skeletal remains from around 350 CE revealed something astonishing: traces of tetracycline in the bones. Tetracycline is an antibiotic that wouldn't be discovered by Western medicine until 1948. How did it get into ancient Nubian bones? Research revealed the Nubians brewed beer from grain contaminated with Streptomyces bacteria, the same bacteria that produces tetracycline. Chemical analysis of residue in ancient brewing vessels confirmed the presence of the antibiotic compound. The Nubians consumed this beer regularly, effectively treating bacterial infections through a fermentation process they'd perfected over generations. They didn't call it antibiotics, but it worked. In West Africa, traditional Yoruba medical practitioners performed cataract surgeries using specialized needles. They treated snake bites with herbal compounds that modern pharmaceutical analysis has confirmed contain effective anti-venom properties. They set broken bones using splinting techniques identical to modern orthopedic practices. In southern Africa, archaeological excavations revealed surgical tools, including what appear to be trepanation instruments for drilling into the skull. Analysis of ancient skulls shows evidence of successful brain surgeries with bone regrowth, indicating patients survived the procedures. African physicians across the continent developed extensive pharmacological knowledge. They used over 5,000 different plant species for medicinal purposes. Many of these traditional remedies are now being studied by modern pharmaceutical companies and proving effective. Artemisia, used in traditional African medicine for fever, became the basis for modern anti-malarial drugs. African traditional medicine identified the properties of khat, iboga, and dozens of other plants with documented pharmaceutical effects. But here's what the silence machine tried to suppress. This wasn't lucky guessing. This was systematic botanical and medical knowledge developed through centuries of empirical observation, experimentation, and documentation. When European colonizers encountered African medical practices, they dismissed them as primitive superstition. Witch doctor rituals, tribal medicine. They banned many traditional practices and imprisoned healers who refused to stop. But those same colonizers quietly took notes. They collected samples, they documented the plants and techniques, and European pharmaceutical companies later patented treatments derived from African traditional knowledge, without compensation, without acknowledgement. The theft was intellectual and economic. African medical knowledge also traveled through the diaspora. Enslaved Africans brought their medical traditions to the Americas. In Jamaica, Brazil, Haiti, and the southern United States, African herbal medicine persisted, adapted, and saved lives when European doctors were still bleeding patients to death. Many traditional remedies used by African Americans have direct lineages to West African medical practices. The knowledge survived because it worked. But perhaps the most remarkable evidence of African medical sophistication comes from ancient Egyptian dental work. Analysis of mummies has revealed gold wire dental bridges, tooth fillings made from resin compounds, and evidence of dental drilling to treat cavities. One skull from around 2200 BCE shows a filled molar with a resin compound mixed with crushed gemstone, likely for structural reinforcement. Another shows evidence of jaw surgery to treat an abscess. These weren't barbaric interventions. These were skilled medical procedures requiring anatomical knowledge, surgical precision, and post-operative care. So when Western medicine claims to have invented surgery, anesthesia, and pharmaceutical science, remember this: African doctors were already performing these procedures thousands of years earlier. The silence machine buried that truth because acknowledging African medical science meant acknowledging African intellectual achievement, and that threatened the entire colonial narrative. But medicine wasn't the only field where Africa excelled. The greatest repository of African genius, the discovery that would prove beyond any doubt the sophistication of African scholarship, was hidden in a city they claimed never existed: a city of books. In 1828, a French explorer named René Caillié became one of the first Europeans to reach Timbuktu and return alive. His description shocked the Western world. I had formed a totally different idea of the grandeur and wealth of this city. It presented nothing but a mass of ill-looking houses built of earth. He was disappointed. Europeans had imagined Timbuktu as a city of gold. What Caillié didn't understand, what he couldn't see, was that Timbuktu's wealth wasn't in its buildings, it was in its books, hidden in private libraries, tucked away in family collections, buried in desert sands to protect them from invaders, were over 700,000 manuscripts, ancient texts documenting mathematics, astronomy, physics, medicine, law, philosophy, and theology. These weren't religious scriptures copied mindlessly by monks. These were original works of scholarship, mathematical treatises, astronomical charts, medical diagnoses, legal arguments, poetry, chemistry, geography. Between the 13th and 17th centuries, Timbuktu was home to Sankore University, which housed one of the largest libraries in the world. At its peak, over 25,000 students studied there, making it larger than most European universities of the same period. The curriculum? Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, chemistry, physics, geography, history, art, and theology. Students came from across Africa and the Islamic world to study in Timbuktu. It was the intellectual capital of West Africa, a center of learning that rivaled anything in Europe or the Middle East. But European historians barely mentioned it. When they did, they dismissed it as a regional religious school. The narrative had to be maintained. Africa had no intellectual tradition. Then, in the early 2000s, something extraordinary happened. Researchers began cataloging the hidden manuscripts of Timbuktu. What they found rewrote African history. One manuscript contained detailed mathematical calculations for calculating the square root of numbers, using methods identical to modern algebra. Another documented astronomical observations tracking planetary movements across decades. A medical text described surgical procedures with anatomical precision. There were chemistry manuscripts describing mineral extraction and refinement. Geography texts mapping trade routes across the Sahara and beyond. Legal documents debating complex questions of jurisprudence and ethics. These weren't simple records. They were sophisticated scholarly works demonstrating mastery of multiple disciplines. One manuscript particularly stunning, a 16th century astronomy text accurately predicting solar eclipses using calculations that required an understanding of spherical geometry and celestial mechanics. Another documented the properties of various medicinal plants with descriptions so precise that modern botanists could identify the exact species referenced. The manuscripts were written in Arabic, Tamashek, Songhai, and other African languages. They showed a multilingual scholarly culture engaged in international intellectual exchange. But here's the gut-wrenching part. While Timbuktu was producing this scholarship, Europe was burning books. The medieval period saw massive destruction of texts deemed heretical or pagan. The Library of Alexandria had long been destroyed. European scholarship was dominated by religious institutions that tightly controlled what could be studied. Meanwhile, in Africa, scholars in Timbuktu were freely exploring mathematics, science, and philosophy. The irony is devastating. While Europe was in what historians call the Dark Ages, Africa was writing encyclopedias, but the silence machine couldn't allow that truth to spread. When colonial powers invaded West Africa, they targeted libraries. In the 19th and 20th centuries, French colonial forces burned thousands of manuscripts. Other texts were stolen and taken to European museums. Many more were lost to neglect as colonial authorities systematically defunded and dismantled African educational institutions. The goal was clear: erase evidence of African intellectual achievement. But some families hid their manuscripts. They buried them in the desert. They walled them up in secret rooms. They preserved what they could. And when researchers finally began cataloging what survived, the scope of the loss became apparent. An estimated 700,000 manuscripts once existed in Timbuktu alone. Today, maybe 300,000 survive, and many are severely damaged. Imagine what we lost. How much knowledge? How many scientific discoveries? How many philosophical insights? All burned or stolen or left to decay because the silence machine couldn't tolerate evidence of African genius. But manuscripts weren't the only evidence. There was something else, something physical, undeniable, impossible to destroy completely. Bronze. February 1897. British forces invade the Kingdom of Benin in what is now Nigeria. They're expecting resistance. What they find instead stops them cold. Bronze plaques covering the walls of the royal palace, thousands of them, sculptures of such technical sophistication that the British soldiers assume they must have been made by Europeans. They weren't. The Benin bronze casters had perfected lost wax casting, one of the most technically demanding metallurgical processes ever developed. The process requires precise control of temperature, timing, and technique. One mistake and months of work are ruined. But the Benin artists didn't make mistakes. Their bronze plaques showed microscopic detail, facial expressions, individual strands of hair, intricate patterns on clothing. Some pieces were so delicate that modern metallurgists can't figure out how they were made without cracking. Analysis revealed the bronze alloy used was optimized for both strength and workability, a formula that required extensive experimental knowledge of metallurgy. This wasn't primitive tribal art. This was engineering disguised as beauty. The Kingdom of Benin had urban planning that rivaled European cities. The capital, Benin City, had straight, wide streets lit by oil lamps. It had a sophisticated drainage system, multi-story buildings, a royal palace complex covering multiple acres. In 1602, a Dutch visitor described Benin City. The town seems to be very large. When you enter it, you go into a great broad street, which is 7 or 8 times broader than the Wormoes Street in Amsterdam. The houses are large, especially that of the king, which is richly decorated with fine columns. The city is wealthy and industrious. But in 1897, when British forces arrived, they didn't see a civilization. They saw resources to plunder. They looted the bronze plaques. They burned the royal palace. They shipped thousands of artifacts back to Britain, where they were distributed to museums or sold to private collectors. Some bronzes were melted down for their metal content, and then came the lie. European newspapers and museums claimed the bronzes must have been made by Portuguese traders or Arab merchants. Africans, they insisted, couldn't produce such sophisticated metalwork. The German anthropologist Felix von Luschan examined the bronzes. He was forced to admit, Cellini could not have cast them better, nor anyone else before or since to the present day. But even his grudging acknowledgement came with caveats. He suggested European influence, foreign tutelage, anything to avoid crediting African metallurgists. The evidence told a different story. Benin bronze casting dates back to the 13th century, long before significant European contact. The techniques were indigenous, developed over centuries of experimentation and refinement. The artistic styles were uniquely Benin, depicting local rulers, ceremonies, and cultural practices. There was no European involvement. The Benin artists developed everything themselves. Modern metallurgical analysis has revealed just how sophisticated the process was. The bronzes weren't pure bronze. They were carefully engineered alloys of copper, zinc, and lead, with proportions adjusted based on the specific requirements of each piece. The casting process required temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, maintained precisely throughout multi-hour casting sessions. The artists used ceramic molds that could capture detail down to individual fingerprints. Some plaques show textile patterns so fine that you can identify the specific weaving technique used in the original fabric. This level of technical precision requires not just skill, but deep understanding of material science, thermodynamics, and artistic design. And it wasn't just bronze. Benin artists worked with ivory, wood, and iron. They created intricate carved tusks that took years to complete. They forged ceremonial weapons with patterns etched into the metal. The Kingdom of Benin was an industrial power. So why would a global empire fear African art? Because it wasn't just art, it was proof. Undeniable, physical proof that Africans had developed advanced technologies independently, that they had sophisticated artistic traditions, that they built complex civilizations. Every bronze plaque was evidence against the lies that justified colonization. So they stole them. They hid them in European museums. They created false narratives about their origin. And they taught generations of students that Africa had no civilization worth studying. The Benin Bronzes still sit in museums across Europe. Britain alone holds over 900 pieces in the British Museum. Thousands more are scattered in German, American, and French collections. Nigeria has been requesting their return for decades. Most have not been returned. The theft continues. But there was one discovery, one piece of evidence that the silence machine feared above all others. A discovery so shocking, so fundamentally reality-altering that even today, most people have never heard of it. It wasn't art, it wasn't architecture, it wasn't even human-made. It was something that rewrites everything we think we know about science, geology, and the history of our planet. In 1972, French scientists analyzing uranium ore samples from Oklo in Gabon made a discovery that should have been impossible. The uranium isotope ratios were wrong. Natural uranium contains about 0.720% uranium-235, but the Oklo samples showed only 0.717%. That's a tiny difference, but in nuclear physics, it's enormous. Something had depleted the uranium-235. Something had caused nuclear fission. Further analysis revealed the truth. Approximately 2 billion years ago, natural nuclear reactors operated at Oklo. Read that again. Natural nuclear reactors. 16 separate reactor zones where geological conditions created self-sustaining nuclear chain reactions. Water acted as a moderator. The uranium concentration was high enough to reach criticality. The reactions ran for hundreds of thousands of years, producing plutonium and other fission products that are still detectable today. This wasn't a freak occurrence. The conditions required for this to happen are extraordinarily specific. The uranium had to be concentrated. The water flow had to be precise. The geological formation had to be stable for millennia. And somehow, it all lined up. Naturally. In Gabon, when the discovery was announced, Western scientific journals were skeptical. Some refused to publish the findings for years, because natural nuclear reactors weren't supposed to exist. They contradicted fundamental assumptions about nuclear physics and geological processes, but the evidence was irrefutable. The Oklo reactors operated at power levels similar to modern nuclear plants. They automatically regulated themselves. When the water heated up from the reaction, it would evaporate, slowing the reaction. When it cooled and water returned, the reaction would restart. It was a self-regulating nuclear reactor operating 2 billion years ago without human intervention. Or was it? Here's where things get uncomfortable. Some scientists have quietly debated whether the Oklo formation was entirely natural or whether it shows evidence of engineering. The uranium concentration at Oklo is higher than what natural geological processes typically produce. The arrangement of the reactor zone shows a level of organization that some find suspiciously systematic. The waste products remained contained in ways that seem almost designed. To be clear, mainstream science considers Oklo purely natural. But there are nagging questions, anomalies in the data, that don't quite fit standard geological models. And those questions are usually mentioned quietly, if at all, because acknowledging even the possibility that the Oklo reactors might show evidence of ancient engineering, whether human or otherwise, opens a door that establishment science wants kept firmly closed. What if ancient civilizations achieved technological sophistication we can barely imagine? What if that knowledge was lost in cataclysms we've forgotten? What if Africa was the site of scientific achievements that predate recorded history? These aren't mainstream positions, but they're questions the evidence forces us to consider. Even if we accept the mainstream view that Oklo was entirely natural, the discovery is still profound. It means that under the right conditions, nuclear reactions can occur naturally on Earth. It means complex physical systems can self-organize and self-regulate. It means the universe is stranger than we thought, and it happened in Africa. That matters because of what it represents. Africa as the site of extraordinary phenomena that challenges scientific assumptions and forces us to rethink what we know. The silence machine tried to minimize Oklo. Many people have never heard of it. It's rarely taught in schools. When mentioned, it's framed as a geological curiosity, interesting but not significant. But it is significant because it happened in Africa. And that means Africa has been the site of extraordinary scientific phenomena since the dawn of geological time. This wasn't just African genius. This was African science operating on a planetary scale. And the world barely knows it exists. So here we are. At the end of this journey through forbidden history, we've seen African metallurgists forging steel when Europe was still in the Bronze Age. We've seen architects building precision stone cities without mortar. We've seen astronomers tracking invisible stars. We've seen doctors performing brain surgery and using antibiotics. We've seen scholars writing encyclopedias in the world's largest universities. We've seen bronze casters creating masterpieces that modern engineers can't replicate. We've seen evidence of genius everywhere we looked. So the question isn't, did Africa contribute to human civilization? The question is, if all this genius existed, why were we taught the opposite? Let me show you something. Right now, across Europe and America, museums hold millions of African artifacts. The British Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Louvre, German ethnological museums, private collections, stolen artifacts, every single one. The Benin Bronzes alone, over 10,000 pieces scattered across the world. Ashanti gold, Congo sculptures, Ethiopian manuscripts, Yoruba ivory, Dogon masks, all taken, all displayed as if they're somehow Europe's cultural heritage. Libraries burned in Timbuktu, research suppressed in academic journals, textbooks written to erase African contributions, maps drawn to make Africa look primitive, photographs staged to make Africans look backwards. The silence machine wasn't an accident, it was a system, a deliberate, coordinated effort across centuries to erase African genius from human history. Why? Because if people knew the truth, if they understood that Africa had civilizations as advanced as anywhere on Earth, then the entire justification for colonization collapses. You can't enslave a people while claiming they're your equals. You can't steal resources while acknowledging the sophistication of those you're robbing. You can't maintain empires built on the myth of white supremacy if everyone knows that myth is a lie. So they buried the truth. They burned the books. They stole the artifacts. They rewrote the history. They taught the lie so many times that even today, most people believe it. But here's what they couldn't destroy: the evidence. It's still there, buried under the Sahara, preserved in manuscripts, cast in bronze, carved in stone, written in the stars. The truth survived. It always does. African genius wasn't forgotten, it was buried. But now it's being uncovered, excavated, documented, shared. Researchers across Africa and the diaspora are reclaiming this history. They're digitizing manuscripts, they're demanding artifacts back. They're rewriting textbooks, they're telling the truth. And that terrifies the silence machine. Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. Once you see the evidence, you can't unsee it. Once you understand what was stolen, you can't stop demanding it back. This isn't ancient history. This is about who gets to tell the story of human civilization. This is about whose contributions are remembered and whose are erased. This is about justice, historical, cultural, and intellectual justice. The silence machine wants you to move on, to forget, to accept the narrative you were taught. But you don't have to. If you believe these stories deserve the world's attention, if you think the truth matters more than comfortable lies, then subscribe to Ancient Africa Untold, because we're not done. There are hundreds more stories like these, thousands of discoveries still hidden, millions of voices still silenced. Together we can uncover what they tried to erase. Africa's genius wasn't lost. It was stolen, and now it rises again.